Recording. All right. Hello and welcome. My name is Paula Hastings. I'm the volunteer recruiter for Secours Volunteer Ministry and an alum from 2018-2019. And I am joined by Mark Conforti. Welcome, Mark.
Hey everyone, thank you Paula for that introduction. As she said, my name is Mark Conforti. I am a graduate from Villanova University from the year 2019, and I was in the 2019 to 2020 service year for the Secours Volunteer Ministry. And currently I am in my first year of medical school at Rowan School of Osteopathic Medicine in South Jersey. So I'm really happy to be here today, Paula.
Yeah, wonderful. Thanks for joining, Mark. So we're just going to talk about a couple things with Mark's experience with BSVM, and just start it off. Mark, what were you doing before you even thought of BSVM?
So like I said, I went to Villanova, so I definitely was very much concerned about school. I majored in biology. And I was pretty involved on campus. I was an RA. I did volunteer EMT stuff. I was very since starting college, I knew I kind of wanted to enter the medical field. So really a lot of my college experiences aligned with getting healthcare experiences and determining if I wanted to be a doctor or not. So it was probably a while until I actually started considering service after my undergrad. So for a while I was very much planning on going right after college, applying to medical school and getting in right after my senior year. But things kind of turn up on their head. I found that it was very stressful to prepare during my junior year, because I would need to take the MCAT during my junior year. And it was a lot of stress associated with that. I started questioning my decision whether or not I wanted to do medicine. And so it opened up the opportunity to start thinking about other things. And when I actually first heard about this program from another alumni that did the program a couple of years ago. Her name was Claire, and she was a Villanova graduate, and she came back on campus. And that was the first instance during my junior year where I maybe I should start considering service a little bit. But it was very much before BSVM, trying to figure out how to apply to medical school, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's very similar to my experience too. I was pre-med and was okay, got to do a gap year, trying to find stuff, and whatever opens the door. My journey went a different way too, where I ultimately realized that medicine was not my path. But I had an advisor that called taking a year after college a discernment year. And I really liked that, rather than, the term gap year or something else, because it's a very full year. But that is something that, doing that active discernment is really nice to find out what you are really called towards. So can you tell me some more about what you were doing in your service during your BSVM year, and maybe one thing that put you outside of your comfort zone? And then how did you become comfortable with that?
Yeah, so I was in the Richmond site, Richmond, Virginia. And so my placement was at Richmond Community Hospital, and I was a volunteer patient liaison on the inpatient floor. So basically my role consisted of being a compassionate presence, and I worked with the nursing staff and patient advocacy in case management to kind of provide this extra care of support for the patients on the floor. And that took shape in many ways. So I would frequently round to visit the patients and kind of just go in and talk to them, see how their day is going, see how they're feeling about their care and their medical conditions. I would organize different events for the patients. So I got to do a lot of fun things that like I called on my like RA experience in college for. So it was a lot of fun to tie in those experiences. And I did some like art. I played some music with the patients because I had a ukulele. So it was very much like, because I was because my volunteer year was the second like year that our our placement was in like Virginia. It was the second year that BSVM was in Virginia. There was still like a lot of like adaptability with my role, and I was able to kind of like make it like fit like my personality and kind of meld it around like my skills and talents. So I was able to really use like my creativity and like wanting to connect with patients to make that like a central like piece of my role. And it's like really it was really cool to kind of like get to know the patients. I will say though that I know you mentioned like something that like was like outside of my comfort zone. Kind of coming into this new role, like I think it is very like it was very easy to get overwhelmed because it was something that I adapt to and like learn how to mold like the role like towards me. I had to figure that out, and that was very like difficult like in the beginning, because I would go in and I would into like a patient room and I would just be like, I don't really have like necessarily like a structured thing to do, and like just kind of going in and sitting in the patient's room and like just talking. It's like much more difficult than like you realize, especially if the patient isn't necessarily like the most verbal. So kind of like being present with the patients in ways for longer periods of time, and being okay with that uncomfortability of just sitting there in silence was definitely something that I think I needed to learn to get better at, and definitely put me outside of my comfort zone like initially in the beginning. But then you just like learn, like, and then like I just learned to kind of get comfortable with it and like being okay like sitting in silence for like 30 minutes with the patient, whether or not like it's like we're watching TV like together, or we're painting or doing something, or just like sitting and kind of like taking in the time. And I think those moments, even if though they seem like boring, were like the most meaningful moments like in my role. And it's things that I kind of like appreciate, like having the chance to like slow down and having the opportunity to just like be with a person for a prolonged period of time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that ministry of presence
Yeah.
that is really kind of, it's difficult to learn because
It's extremely difficult.
yeah, I will say like that I get asked a lot, like what was one of the most difficult things that during your year? And that's one of the things I bring up a lot too, of like that journey from doing to being,
Yeah.
where we had to have a conversation in my community because a couple of us hated the question, "What did you do today?" when we would at dinner, because we were like, well, sometimes it wasn't necessarily like doing a lot. It was just, being with people. And so we had a conversation like, let's not ask each other that question anymore. We'll like ask about our days and stuff, or like what, how was your day? Just reframe the question, because being with people, it takes a lot of energy too, like to learn how to be a compassionate presence.
Mm-hmm.
But it is a great skill that I'm very glad I learned. And I'm sure like that is going to help you a lot in your practice as a physician as well.
I would hope so,
Oh yeah, being a compassionate presence is pretty important, I think.
Yeah.
Though it's definitely going to be busier than volunteer year.
No, definitely.
Yeah. Yeah, when you were saying that like experience of being comfortable with the silence just reminded me of a story of when I had to do that as well, of like I kept trying to make conversation with a patient,
Mm-hmm.
and and eventually was just like, I need to be silent and sit and color with her. And then that did open up the conversation, and she became one of the patients that I was closest with on the floor when she came in every week. But that meant being really uncomfortable for those first 20 minutes of just sitting and coloring in silence.
Yeah.
Well, you mentioned those moments as one thing that you really enjoyed, those moments of silence. So can you tell us maybe something else, some other time of a specific moment when you saw God's presence in your service?
Yes. I'm trying to think of like a really sound example. And I reflected on this so much, so I should have like an immediate response. But I'm trying to think of like an example that I know the full story of, like off the top of my head. But I think one thing that I did with the help of my like fellow housemates and community was organize like a carnival on the inpatient floor. And I think that like it was very like stressful to kind of like plan like the activities that we were going to do and like all that kind of like stuff, because we had balloon animals and like we had like games and prizes, and like there was a like it was hard because some of the patients were like in isolation rooms, so like we wanted to like be able to bring the carnival to them but in isolation. So we ended up, instead of like necessarily like having it like a big like carnival like on the inpatient floor, like we like made like a cart that we like took into like each, like now we didn't take the cart like into each patient's room, but we rolled it like in front of like the door, and then like we like brought in some of the stuff to like play the games and like bring some prizes and do like balloon animals. But there's this one patient that that he was there since I like started like my service, like probably like in August of my like service year, August, like September of my service year. And he, the interesting thing about like the inpatient floor is that some of the patients like were there for a prolonged period of time. So even though they were like on an inpatient floor, they were there, and it was like, it's usually supposed to be like an acute thing where like a patient's there for a couple of days, and a lot of the patients were, but some of the patients that the hospital were caring for were there for prolonged periods of times, weeks to months, some over a year, because of like complex processes involving like insurance and power of like medical care. And so they really complicated like how the patient was going to be eventually like transferred to like the next like medical facility or like ultimately to like determine like where the next best place is for to be their medical care. So there was this one patient that was there for a very prolonged period of time. He was actually like there before I started. The previous volunteer, Chris, who he got to know this patient pretty well. And when I started, he was there for about 6 months into my own service year. And I think what was really like, it was like, at first when I went into his room, he was very like cold to me like the first day. And I think it's because I was trying to be like overly helpful with him. Like I would like talk to him. I would like say like so much. I'm like, I could do this, like I could do like this for you. I could like help you like open your soda and stuff like that. And he didn't really like he wanted to be as independent as possible. And so I remember him like yelling at me and he like apologized, but like I think he was rightful like to be upset because I like just came into his space and just was trying to be like overly helpful, like but like I didn't necessarily realize in the moment what I was doing. And that as I spent like more time with him, he opened up to me. But I remember like we came into when we had the carnival, because I brought up the carnival, we brought in a balloon, and he was like, what is going on? And because like we got like a helium tank, and then we gave him the stuffed animal. He's like, what are you guys doing? And he was just really happy that like we came by and like brought him some stuff. And as I'm like talking about him, like I remember like stories that I had, and like this, and as I like talk, like I think earlier that year before the carnival, and I think this answers your question about seeing God's presence a little bit better and more succinctly. But I was actually, I went in with the ukulele into his room to play music for him. And as I was playing music, I wasn't sure like how if he was gonna like the music or whatever, but as I was playing, he like he didn't know the songs, but he like started like humming along. And it was a very like beautiful, like it was a very beautiful moment that I was able to like have with him. Because I never heard him sing before, and he smiled like as we were like singing. He like said, "I did such a good job," even though I know he was lying. I'm not that great of a singer, but but it was a very like nice thing to kind of see like that side of him, like, and him like also like sharing in the music with me. I think it was a very like it was a very cool thing to like experience with someone. And I hope that like it was able to kind of just like give him a little bit of like joy, as opposed to like just like the TV like being on all the time and all that kind of stuff. But I think that answered your question in a very long about way, as I typically answer questions like that.
Oh no, I loved it. It was really beautiful, because there are so many moments of God's presence. And like you said at the beginning, that we reflect on it every 2 weeks. We have these ministry reflection questions, or MRQs, where we talk about where we are seeing God's presence. So there's a lot of those moments. And that's just such a beautiful moment of that music. And it was definitely brought him joy, I'm sure. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, no problem.
As just a final wrap-up question, what is one piece of advice that you would, give to yourself at the beginning of your service year, or that you would say, especially because you have this unique experience of, part of your service year last year was at the beginning of this pandemic time that we're in, and hopefully we're near to the end of it, but it is kind of a different way of approaching service. So what advice would you give for those who are about to start a service year or are discerning it right now?
Yeah, so I think it's definitely like a challenge now, like with like a lot of things being like socially distant or virtual. But I think like a good like general piece of advice I kind of wish I told myself before like starting the service year is just kind of like lean into like everything. Honestly, I think that's like one thing I wish I like did more like prior to like kind of because because of like COVID, like my service year was cut short, and I had to, for family reasons, travel back to my hometown to be with family. And so one thing I really wished was that like, because that time was kind of cut short, is that I wish I did more. And like, I feel like everyone wishes that they can do more, and it's like, you can't do everything. But and self-care is important, so you shouldn't just like go off and like try to like do everything. It's important to like take care of yourself and kind of like just rest. But I think it's very easy to get into the habit of like, just get into habits. Like I am a creature of habit. Like, even if I don't think about it, like it's very comfortable to like fall into comfortability, and you don't have to like always like be in a like an uncomfortable state. But I think it's like nice to kind of shake things up a little bit and kind of just, because I don't know, it's like it keeps you alive. It reminds you of like our humanity, and kind of like that we all only have like not that much time, and like in terms of like we just gotta like find time to like enjoy the things around us. And I think if you're like, not that you always have to constantly think about that, like, but I think if you're like able to like have like a little reminder, it helps with being present. It helps you, it allows you to kind of be present a little bit more in like everything and everything that you do, whether it's like with your community members or with the people at your service site, or your family or your friends or like whoever. And that's super important. And that's, I think, a piece of advice that's like important to remind yourself, like during your service year, and then just for life in general, because who knows what's going to happen.
Yeah. Oh, that's so great. Lean in. I
Yeah.
love it. Such great advice. Thank you so much, Mark.
Yeah, no problem.
Well, thank you for joining. I'm going to go ahead and sign off. We'll say goodbye and thank you.
Thank you so much, Paula, and good luck, everyone.